So this is That's What She Said, and I'm going to welcome to the show and thank you very much for your service to our country, Jeffrey Beals.
Thanks a lot for having me.
I'm honored. I am honored to have you here and honored to have you in our studio. So I'd love to have our listeners get to know you and your personal background. You know, before we really get into the meat and potatoes of our political discussions, if I understand correctly, did you grow up on a Thanksgiving turkey farm, or what's the deal here?
A livestock farm. Since I'm 7 years old, we have a livestock farm of every variety in the Hudson Valley. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I grew up on a poultry farm on eastern Long Island, so
okay.
Yeah,
then you definitely know the sights and you know the smells.
Oh, unfortunately, yeah. But I'll tell you, it makes you stronger, and you learn how to work.
Well, and you learn stuff to respect, because I was at the Delaware Fair the other day.
Us too, yesterday.
I was there, and I just saw some Boer goats, and we raised Boer goats at one point,
yeah.
And they were very impressive. I was impressed.
Yeah.
They were way better than the Boer goats that I was raising on our farm. I mean, we had a lot more, and I saw a girl who only had about 12 of them to care for, but she was doing a heck of a job.
Yeah.
So you can certainly appreciate the work farmers put in.
The kids really impressed me. I have to say that. Now, our granddaughter, now my youngest daughter is a teacher, and I understand your wife.
Yeah, my wife.
Is a teacher?
My wife is a kindergarten teacher at the same place where I'm a history teacher.
Right, and this is really interesting because my youngest daughter, who used to teach in a gang district on Long Island, and after about 16 years, and was tired of losing 11 and 12-year-olds to gang violence, she said, "I'm done." Her and her husband. Right. Packed up their little one and said, you know, we're moving up by you guys. We want it safer. We want it cleaner. And they're much happier here. They love it up here. But the sad thing is, I grew up on that island. And there was a time where my grandparents and my parents owned what would be considered like 3 or 4 city blocks, and it was farming, and people from the city would, you know, move down there, and they'd say, oh, we can't stand these smells, you know, it's terrible. And, you know, my dad would be like, well, why did you move here? It's farm area. This is the country. It was considered the country. And at least up here, we have a right to farm, and you can't do that. Down there, you could do that and make complaints.
Right.
But anyway, so since you were 7, huh?
Yeah, that was a huge part of my life, still a big part of my life. But,
it makes a big difference on how you see things.
Yeah, it definitely does. And this is our congressional district is a big place. It's got a lot of variety to it. And I guess I've lived different parts of the different cultures that span our district, because I obviously know a lot about farming from my experience with both turkeys and goats and cattle on our family farm. But there's also a lot going on in the cities. There's a lot going on in Woodstock, and these are all places that I've traveled.
Yes.
I often talk about it that, I spend some days in Cairo and Greene County, and I've also spent a lot of time in Cairo in Egypt.
Yes, well, that gets me to the other part of my discussion, because you don't just have that country background where you know farmers and the people here, the working people. You also went to Harvard?
I did. Yeah.
And you also were a CIA intelligence officer.
Right. Well, I grew up I'm 41 years old as of yesterday.
You don't look it. Happy birthday.
Well, thank you so much. And, I was part of this generation that grew up thinking that democracy is a thing you fight for overseas.
Yes.
That America had won the American century. The fall of communism was part of, the formative events of my childhood and the coming of the new millennium. And so when I was drawn to public service, which I always was, my thoughts were really attuned to overseas, where I thought I could make the biggest difference. And so out of college, I became an intelligence officer with the CIA working on the Middle East. And I traveled all around the region, worked in Washington too, and I was briefing ambassadors and congressmen and writing the president's daily brief to try to make it that our decisions would be based on knowledge, not ignorance.
Yes.
That was my goal. And in time, I rose to join the State Department, and I became a diplomat. My first posting was in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and that was where I really began to get involved in what I'd always dreamed of, which was policymaking, trying to affect not just the briefings, but to actually affect what the United States was going to do in a really troubled region of the world. So I did that, and I worked with my best friend, which was Chris Stevens. Yeah, and he was our ambassador in Benghazi, who we lost in Benghazi. But he and I were really close friends and worked all around the West Bank and Gaza Strip together. And then the rest of my story is the Iraq War happened while I was there, while I was in Jerusalem and in the West Bank and Gaza. And I was called about a year into it to help our soldiers and help our country find a way out of the mess that it was in, because I speak fluent Arabic and I certainly know a lot of the players in the region. And I agreed to go out there, and I became one of the longest-serving diplomats of the Iraq War. And I worked to mediate the drafting of Iraq's constitution, and I reached out, found the insurgents that were fighting us, and began ceasefire talks between the highest levels of our government, our ambassador and our generals, and these insurgents for the first time, in a process that ultimately helped us to begin to extricate ourselves from Iraq and stabilize the place as best we could. I was decorated by the Army and the State Department for that work, but I became convinced that the fight for democracy, which I'd always thought needed to happen overseas, really needed to happen in our own country, that things were not going right. It wasn't the place that I had always thought it was when I was younger, and it needed to get better. I came back to my family farm, and I lived there, and that's where I was raising Thanksgiving turkeys, like you mentioned, a lot of them. They're bourbon red turkeys. They're sort of the opposite of the butterball agribusiness turkeys.
Right.
I married my wife Suhair on the banks of the pond in our farm, and we had our two sons, Abraham and Joseph, and I answered a call to start teaching. And I started doing teaching and working there, and then I became the history teacher at Woodstock. And I've really been loving that.
One of my favorite subjects.
You can learn a lot, and you don't want to repeat it.
I majored in nursing, but I minored in political science. So, we have put less importance on the teaching of history to our young, to a lot of our young, and a lot of people are rewriting our history as we speak. A lot of the wrong people are allowing it to happen and putting an emphasis on the wrong people as good people. Mm-hmm. It seems to me. Mm-hmm. And it kind of is upsetting, because we fought a lot of wars to protect the democracy of a lot of people all over the world. And
there's a reason we study U.S. history in school. Yeah. Our country's a really unusual country, because our history, we have, John F. Kennedy used to call it a civic religion. And I think there was a lot to that. It's the idea that America, unlike other countries, is more than, and not at all, a racial identity. It's a deeper identity about values and a story of a people of immigrants on this continent trying to do something different that had never been done before on Earth, and that they saw an opportunity to do for the first time. And when you understand that story and you teach it and you learn it, you realize each of you are a part of it. Right. And anybody can represent it if they are willing to, and if they can really believe in those ideals and get that story. And, the amazing thing is, this is the 19th Congressional District. We happen to have, it's a history teacher's dream, but it's also a congressional candidate's dream, and it's something that speaks to the students that I talk to that are helping with my campaign and people I meet. We have within our district Franklin Delano Roosevelt's home.
Yes.
We have Cooperstown, the American national pastime. And we have my town, Woodstock. And when you just take those three threads, you've got some of the best of American history, all bundled up into this odd gerrymandered space on the map that I think can mean a lot and can really rally people to a place where we revive the Democratic Party and revive what we're all about.
Yeah. And when you think about it, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you've got two hits right there, because you've got Eleanor, one of the strongest first ladies ever.
And a huge proponent of human rights.
Yes.
Which is a huge message of this country that's also being extinguished or downplayed at this moment, and it's a reason we've been a leader in the world.
Yes.
It's part of our power in the world is our moral authority, and our willingness to stand up for ideals that we've practiced, that we've tried to hold ourselves up to, and sometimes failed. But that heritage, it's what our whole country's about, and it's also what this congressional race needs to be about. And I think we can do something extraordinary now, because I think there's an awakening happening in the country about those values, because they're seeing them in abeyance for the first time.
Yes, and that had to be, I mean, you as a diplomat, as an American, had to have been aghast when they used Chris Stevens' death as a political football over and over and over again.
You know, the worst thing is our foreign policy winds up getting politicized when it shouldn't be. And when I joined the Foreign Service, that was a time where any diplomat knew that they would serve under both Democratic and Republican administrations.
Sure.
And it wouldn't necessarily matter that much, because there was a lot of consensus about foreign policy. And I myself worked very closely with officials that were both in the Bill Clinton administration and George W. Bush. I've worked on both sides. I know lots of people in all of those worlds.
Sure.
And it wasn't something that would prevent you from serving. But no question about it, things have changed. When I left the Foreign Service, I was offered a job by ExxonMobil, because I'm a Middle East expert. They knew I could be very useful.
Sure.
And I turned that job down. There was no way I was going to do that. And that was a controversial thing in my own family when I turned that down, because I'll tell you, I would have made a lot more money than I make. And it was to my deep shock that ExxonMobil went and took over the State Department. They appointed the CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So these are things that are really, really shaking to people who believe in what America is supposed to be about, and how we follow our ideals, and where business is supposed to be within our American story, and where it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. And is it not, to keep going on that thread, is it not shocking to you that even Rex Tillerson is not really allowed to do his job, that we have Jared Kushner, who has no business in foreign affairs, getting involved in foreign affairs? I mean, he has no background. He's real estate. We
have a thing that you see when you work with Middle Eastern governments like I did, which is that often the foreign ministry is not a very important place. It's one of the ironies of working with some of these governments that are more authoritarian or dictatorial, that all power flows through the president's office or the dictator's office or the general's office, whoever's in charge. And very often the foreign ministry is just a shell and is not a place where much policy making goes on. And you don't develop your contacts there. And it's definitely a sign of the way things have developed in the United States that the State Department is being diminished in that way, and things are not running out of there. This is one of the many little things that I am seeing that have alarmed me about the direction our country's taking. A bigger one is tribalism. I see that right now happening between our political parties, between the cultures of the people in this country. There is a tendency to look upon the other side as the other, literally. As potentially not even your fellow citizens. Now this is all the beginnings, and I think we can turn it back. I really do believe that. I don't believe it's true, and I believe that we are united by deep, deep common struggles that we are all going through right now. And I just came here. We're in Roxbury. I just went to the gas station, had to fill up right down the block, Sunoco station. Talked to the young man working there at the counter. This is a story that I think unites everybody. Now, I want to tell you right away. They say, what are you running for Congress? What are you, Democrat? I said, yeah, I'm a Democrat. There's a moment of tension.
Right.
Then we talk. How are you doing? Are you getting by here? And what do I find out? The same thing I'm hearing everywhere. This is a young man working 2 jobs. 2 jobs. He's working that gas station. He's working at the restaurant across the street here as a dishwasher.
Yep.
He's working more than 40 hours a week. And he's not making ends meet. He does not make enough money to even afford his own health insurance. Luckily, he's qualifying for Medicaid. So we have a state program for this. But this is absurd. This is somebody who is working more than 40 hours a week, cannot afford anything, cannot afford his own health care. How is this happening in our country? And he himself said to me, when you take all the money he spends just for his rent and his basic expenses, at the end of the month, you know how much he has left? He had a number for it. We were talking about it for a while. He says, I think it's $38. And we're laughing because we know what things cost on, just the main street here in Roxbury or anywhere else. That's nothing. He said, basically, this was his words. He said, basically, I'm working for nothing.
Yes. Yes.
And that's where we're at. That's where we're at as a country right now.
Absolutely.
And my campaign, you want to know why I'm running for office? It's all in a nutshell. It's one sentence. If you work for a living, you should be able to achieve financial security. And that should mean being able to provide for the health care of yourself and your family, a place to live, a home, have money put away for retirement, have your mortgage paid for, have your vehicle paid for, and have some money left over too.
Yeah. And be able to eat.
And be able to eat. Let's not leave out groceries.
Yeah.
That's a basic statement, and it's been true for a long time in America, but it's stopped being true.
Right.
And it's not true, and we unfortunately can get divorced from it. And there are class levels in America, and you can almost forget something that's right in front of your eyes when you stop for gas. But it's right there. And I'll tell you, where that conversation ended, it didn't end with any tribalism. It ended with me and some of the young men in that store agreeing that we need a change here.
Yes.
And I believe very, very strongly that when we get out and we have those conversations, and I've been having them all over the district, we're going to discover an unknown solidarity among what amounts to more than 90% of the people in this country.
I think, my own personal opinion, I believe that that's where we lost the election to Trump, because he put out a false positive. He basically, in my opinion, again, my humble opinion, he conned them into thinking that he was going to make this magic happen for them. For instance, the Acosta mine, which in actuality, the Acosta mine was actually, they started working on that under Obama. He already had that going. And the Acosta mine is not a thermal coal plant. It is actually a metallurgical coal plant, which actually only produces coal for iron and steel development, which is 10% of coal. Now, that's not a lot. And since it's not for heat, what is the point? And that's not a lot of jobs. We already had a certain amount of coal workers, and the entire round is 50,000. A drop in the bucket to the amount of retail workers we are losing in an alarming rate every month. Retail stores are closing every month. And when you think about that, we're not talking about cashiers. We're talking about truck drivers and management and stock people. So what are we doing for them? And what about their wages? And, in the telecommunications department, I think the numbers, according to the Department of Labor, I think we're losing like $63,000 a month.
Well, I'll give you a story there, too. I mean, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's just a personal story. I live in Ulster County. And in Kingston, on Ulster Avenue recently, I met a group of young men who were working at the AT&T store. And they're young guys. They've been working, a few of them have been working there for about 5 years. And they have seen their own commissions getting cut and have reached the point where they realize the CEO is earning over $1,000 an hour. They are now having their health insurance premiums rise tremendously of what they have to pay in. And they went on the first strike of their lives.
Yes.
And it was scary for them. And I went out to stand with them on that strike. I was the only person I know of in this race that went out and did that. And I stood with them on this strike. And it's very unusual to be striking with people who have never done it before. It's a different experience because they're staring in the store window. They're looking for the boss. They see the boss looking out at them. They're going through an extremely dramatic and frightening moment. But they knew they had no choice because something is out of whack. The economy is being rigged against them. And if they don't make a stand now, it'll be too late. Yeah. And they had to make that stand.
I have a friend that works for, used to be called Cablevision. I believe they got bought out by Comcast, which at the beginning of 2016 got bought out by a French billionaire. Mm-hmm. He's been cutting the American positions by the thousands and replacing it with his people. And a lot of it is administration, and he's not only done that, but he's cut their benefits. He's taken away sick time. He's taken away vacation time. And this young man who I know has been with the company for like 20 years. And he said, at this point, I don't know where I'm going to be and how I'm going to feed my family.
We need a raft of positions that make it very clear that we're standing with working people. And I'm talking to young men that have these needs, not just the guy at the gas station, not just my friends who were on that strike CW for CWA. The positions have to be, we stand for working people. We stand for paid family leave and sick leave. We have to give that. We have to make sure that people are getting it. If they're not getting it, they're not being employed correctly, and they're being abused. We have to stand for that. We have to stand for universal health care. I believe very strongly that we have to rein in this industry that is now bankrupting people everywhere. We need to stand for Medicare for all, in my opinion.
Yes, that's a great idea.
That, I think, is a good idea. And we also need to look at our seniors who are, frankly, not working now, and they are not getting by on their Social Security benefits. Those benefits are not high enough. They have not. They were told recently that we can't raise them because cost of living hasn't risen. Everybody knows that it has risen, that you're not making ends meet on Social Security. And their prescription drugs are far too high because our Congress, incredibly, this one is incredible, and man, can I not wait to get into Congress to speak out on this. Our Congress has made it illegal for us to negotiate a better deal on prescription drugs, even though we could negotiate such a deal because we were buying so much through Medicare. We're not allowed to. They literally passed a law preventing us. So these are the things that we have to stand against full-throated and foursquare. And I think when we do it, we're going to rally a lot of people to our side, and people are going to realize what the Democratic Party's all about.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be a strong stand. Not the ones that I've seen now disappoint me in Congress because they have not been strong. They don't open their mouth and stand by what they need to stand by. They've been too quiet and let everybody run over them.
Well, you're being kind, because in the case of New York 19,
I'm on the radio. I have to be.
Well, yeah, that's good. That's good. You should be nice. But in the case of our congressman, I'm past being too soft on this. He's not being quiet. He's been bought off. His election was funded by Wall Street money and the Mercer family and hedge fund titans, and he is now doing the bidding of those corporate interests in order to give them tax breaks and take our money away from us to give to them, and take our own economy away from us and shift it to them. And I don't see a plan for how we're supposed to get by here. Another basic fact about me in this congressional race that's rather unusual is that I live in this district and I work here. I'm a two-income family in this district, and I know how hard it is to get by here, and I know that it's a choice we make. We want to live here. We have to keep our lives. I don't see what the plan that is being offered to people here. I was in Phoenicia the other day talking to a woman who runs a store. She said to me, I haven't made a sale. I can go 20 days without making a sale. And she's lost her home, okay? And she feels a mass growing in her chest. This was a real story. She began crying as she told me this. And she's not going to go to the doctor. She said, it'll have to kill me because I can't face the medical bill. And when I walked out of there, I thought, you know what John Faso would probably say to somebody that tells you I haven't made a sale in 20 days? Say, you got to shut down that store. You got the wrong business. What should she do, John? Should she move to Brooklyn? Because I think that's the general idea now, is that we'll have our entire economy in New York City and based in major metropolitan hubs, and every place else will somehow feed off whatever drips off of that, be it through gentrification or through some, every once in a while, some act of largesse by the federal government. We have to radically address this problem. We have to address the fact that all the wealth in this country is going to the top 1% of our country. It's being drained out of our communities, and people are left with nowhere to turn.
Yep. And it's been accelerating this way for some years. My dad, who had come to this country, his dad was a political dissident. He was an artist in Russia. My grandmother was a seamstress. She was a very popular dressmaker. When the revolution came, they ran for their lives. They left a baby behind. My dad came here and snuck into the service at 17 to fight in World War II. He was very proud to be American. And he's no longer with us, and neither was my mom, but they were hardworking people and paid their bills religiously. And my dad, they adopted a child who was a Russian orphan. They were the type of people that almost everybody in my family served in the military. And my dad told us religiously, if you're not voting when you get to be 18, I'm ashamed, because this is a privilege we have, and do not ever abuse that privilege, because I never had it, we never had it, and this is why we're here. And when my dad died of cancer, and it nearly bankrupted them. And when my mom became elderly, we brought her up here with us. She was a nurse. She could not live off of her pension because the costs had gotten so high. They had no mortgage on their home, but her taxes were so high. Her health insurance was so high. Her prescriptions were so high. She couldn't do it by herself. She had to come live with us so that we could help take care of her. And it made me feel like this country had let her down, because you work all your life, you work so hard. Why is it that you can't live off of what you work so hard for, that you need help? It shouldn't be that way.
Absolutely shouldn't. And what's worse is you're talking about a system that's already in crisis, and then you have this American Health Care Act that they're calling it, Trump Care, which our congressman cast the deciding vote twice to move forward. And this is an act that takes a system that was already in crisis. It was already in crisis. It already wasn't serving your mother. And then he goes and makes it worse. I mean, literally, people are going to not be able to afford to take care of their parents at all.
And kick them out of nursing homes.
And kick them out of nursing homes. And this is something that, it's an inexplicable vote, and it's a beautiful sign of how bad things have gotten, because it's a sign that you're no longer even thinking about your constituents. You are such a believer in big money as being the answer to the electoral map that you don't even worry about it when half the population of your district is up in arms, when a huge grassroots resistance movement is spun up and demanding town halls. You don't even crack a sweat, because you're convinced, and we got to prove him wrong, but he is convinced that there's enough money behind him that it won't matter. It's amazing. It's chilling to think it. But we've reached the point where people like our representative, John Faso, actually believe that the election is buyable and that they can get enough money together to buy it. And we have to prove him terribly, terribly wrong. And not by buying it back ourselves, by over-raising them, because, by the way, you can't. They'll have more money. But through our own political engagement and awareness and our own grassroots activism and our own networks and friendships, I think we can do it. And we have to for the sake of our district, but the whole country's watching us, frankly, so it's for the sake of our country, too.
So this is what has propelled you into the politics.
100%. I taught a class on this last election. I was doing a civics class, for my 11th and 12th graders. And it was on it included, I had representatives from the FASO and Teach Out campaigns to my classroom. I had her, Zephyr's field director. I had one of John Faso's key field operatives. He's actually a Dutchess County legislator. I had them talk to my students, talk to my class. A bunch of them went out and participated in the political process. And, of course, I saw the results come in. And I knew that we needed to act even more dramatically. And I'd spent enough time in the classroom asking the kids to do it that I couldn't sit back and not do it myself.
Okay, so now I know how you feel about the health care issues. And I know how you feel about the wages and the jobs. Let me ask you, how do you feel about women's rights, the reproductive rights? Because that's what she said, and I'm about women empowerments and women rights. And how do you feel? How do you stand on that?
Not only do I support women's rights. Not only do I support women's reproductive rights, I even think that we should get to a point in our conversation where you already knew that I did, because this all falls under the heading of health care for our country. This is not a separate, I mean, this is a separate, it needs to be a separate heading because it's under attack, and so we have to stand for that front. But the fact remains that if you are taking a stance against Planned Parenthood, you are taking a stance against mammograms, exams for cervical cancer. These are life-saving procedures that women need. This is not a moral or ethical debate about abortion. This is a much deeper subject that is much more universally shared, which is people don't want to lose their mothers to breast cancer. We don't want to lose young women to breast cancer. We don't want to lose people to cervical cancer. How is this getting politicized? How are we getting to the point where we would strip people of these services that are anchors for communities? So, 100% is my answer to your question.
I've had Deborah Marcus. I think
she's fantastic.
Yes, I've had her on the show many times. And it was disturbing to me to have, I won't name the senator, but to have a couple of them, Republican senators, stand up and say that they're objecting to having the insurance include paying for maternity care or, a woman's personal health care. Have that be included in insurance that they may have to chip in on, or that, that should be included in the universal health care. And I found that ironic. Well, do they have a mother? Do they have a sister? Do they have a daughter? I mean, and as a nurse, I was a nurse. I'm a retired nurse. I volunteered at one time for Planned Parenthood, and I think what a lot of people aren't aware of is that we have men coming into Planned Parenthood. They come in for their reproductive health. They also come in for diabetes checks, for high blood pressure. There's a lot more that's out there that they're not aware of that helps a lot of people that are on low income.
This is part of the larger healthcare crisis we have in the country.
Yes.
These facilities are playing such a crucial health role in so many communities. But we have to speak about, how did we get in this health crisis? We got into it on a larger level because we're spending more than the rest of the world and we're dying younger. We have a health industry that is, at this point, an industry to the extent that executives and insurance officials are making more money than doctors. The entire system is geared towards paying off these astronomical salaries and compensation packages and bonuses, and meanwhile people themselves are not getting the care they need. I also, it was a road trip to come over here. We stopped at a car show in Olive, and I met a man who was showing off an amazing Bel Air, and he told me that he is luckily on Medicare, but he had a botched colonoscopy. He lost several pints of blood. He was in the hospital for a number of days, and he told me the bill was just staggering to him. He couldn't even believe it. If, it would have ended any hopes of retirement. It was tens of thousands of dollars. And number one, the bill shouldn't be that high. Okay, first of all, because this is not a correctly functioning market. So this is price gouging that is happening on people's health care. So number one, the price itself is wrong. But number two, the system itself is wrong, that some people are literally being subjected to this or making decisions like that other woman I told you about in Phoenicia who won't even go to the doctor because she can't even bear to look at the bill. So there are costs to all this that we know of, and then there are sometimes even scarier to the costs we don't know of, because they're the people who are just afraid to go to the doctor at this point, afraid to have an ambulance pick them up, because you know what the charge is. If an ambulance picks you up, you're in big trouble. You're in maybe as bad trouble as you were for whatever caused you to call the ambulance. Yeah. And then you wind up spending a night in the hospital. Oh man, get out of there before nightfall, because that's going to be even worse. Yeah. It's a terrible situation. It's a true healthcare crisis in the country. It's going on so long. We have to address it full-throatedly. Medicare for all, I believe, is the solution. Universal health care is absolutely the route we have to go in this country.
Yeah, and it's a system that's already set up.
We are doing it. We're running it through Medicare. We're running it through the Veterans Administration. We're already seeing that we are paying far, far, far lower administrative costs, about 3%, running health care as we do in a single-payer system through those administrations. If we were to do this on a larger level, we're spending upwards of 17% on administrative costs on the larger level for the private sector insurance market.
Right.
These are things that we know the solution is there. We've seen it in other countries being enacted, and we have to take the step ourselves to face this on. And I think this is the place to do it. Again, this is our community here. People are struggling to get by throughout the Hudson Valley and upstate New York, where we are right now. It makes no sense that we have a congressman who is not standing up for these things.
Right.
It is simply an aberration on our political map that we've arrived at a point where a congressman who doesn't believe in these things is somehow representing us. Because the us I'm talking about is 90% of the people in our district.
Absolutely. And you're listening to That's What She Said. So I am here with Jeffrey Beals, who is running for the 19th congressional candidacy in the district. And we are going to talk a little bit about the immigration policy here in the United States and what President Trump is doing or not doing. How's that wall going?
You know, they've got a great record of presenting solutions that are clear, simple, and wrong. So, you know, you could file it under build a wall, fire it under ban the Muslims as a solution to terrorism. These are not solutions to these problems. These are simple catchphrases that I think the Democratic Party has to start realizing that we have to be as bold in presenting our own solutions. Right. And we have those solutions. We know very well that diversity is strength in America, that we're a nation of immigrants.
Yeah.
That's number one. We know that. When we talk about immigration and we fearmonger about people coming over from Mexico, we need to remember that the question is, what makes our communities safer? Our communities are safer when people report crimes, when we have adequate law enforcement, when we don't tangle it up with larger political issues, when people are not afraid of coming forward to report wrongdoing when they see it. These are the ways that we keep our communities safe, by building communities, not by tearing them apart. And so I think we got to speak very strongly on that. When it comes to, you know, ban the Muslims, I can tell you, I worked very closely on counterterrorism. That was something that I've dealt with intimately, and I've lost friends in the process. And what I know from that is that we project strength and we win allies and we get good information by being the good guys, by being a country that people know they can talk to and believe we will listen and we will uphold human rights, unlike other regimes in this world. And I had a lot of Muslims who were extraordinarily helpful in counterterrorism work all around the Middle East. And if you didn't have those voices, knowing that they could talk to America, knowing America was different from their own country, knowing that America was not the kind of place that would simply declare Islam the enemy, you would not have gotten the information and you would have been that much more vulnerable to terrorist attack. And this all goes under the larger heading to me, which is what makes America stronger. We need to make America stronger. And what is going on right now by our government and by our representative weakens America. The strength of America is a strength that radiates downward from both standing by our principles overseas so that people respect us, but it also has to do with the strength of our citizens. When our communities are this frayed, when people are not getting by, they can't be active citizens, and then you can't have a strong country. People right now are so strapped by their own economic problems, by just trying to make ends meet, that they can't even really be citizens the way that we need them to.
Right.
And so I think the big heading is, how do you strengthen America as opposed to weakening it? And I think John Faso is weakening our country. And that really upsets me. And I also think that this is the place, you know, we started to talk about it before the break, but the Catskills, Hudson Valley, upstate New York, this is, you know, we are people here who we don't just fall into line. We see things a little differently here. We're not tied up with these big corporate interests. We have a sense of nature, a sense of proportion that is often lacking in some of the other areas of the country. And I think that the rebirth of the Democratic Party and coming back to our ideals, it should happen here.
Yes.
But it's not easy, you know. Even our race, we should talk about that, is not altogether immune to the struggles going on around the country. And I don't just mean on the Republican side. I mean on our side.
Yeah.
Have you followed that a bit?
Yes, I have. And, it's been, I have been so distressed because the infighting, first of all, the parties have been infighting on both sides. We can't win back the presidency. Mm-hmm. We can't win back the executive branches if we can't provide a united front ourselves. Mm-hmm. And be strong and cohesive and agree on what we're going to do and how we're going to present ourselves and what the message should be.
And what the messengers should be, too.
Yes.
We've never won here, by the way. The census was drawn in 2010. And so we lost in 2012, we lost in 2014, we just lost in 2016. And, one of the definitions of insanity is, doing the same thing
and
expecting a different result. Right. And we need to ask ourselves really deeply what's gone wrong, and we don't need to just ask it about 2016. I think that often people want to just look at 2016 and they want to say, okay, Zephyr Teachout lost. Let's find, okay, her name started with a Z. Let's find somebody starts with an A. Let's do the exact opposite as Zephyr. That's not a correct analysis of what went wrong here. The Democratic Party lost. Yeah. It lost both the presidency and it's lost many of the state elections all across the country. Why has it lost it? In my opinion, we lost it because we stopped being clearly the party of working people and patriots.
Yes.
We need to be that. And people think of us, unfortunately, there are people out there who think this is a party of lobbyists or this is a party of elites.
Yeah.
Of executive elites, of corporate financial elites. And I have not been happy that some of the people running for Democratic nomination are coming from those backgrounds, not just here, but in other places. And I think it's dangerous for us. Even if we can come together on what we believe in, I think the messenger and the message need to be aligned, and we need to be that party of working people and patriots. So we have that going on in this race. We have a candidate who's one of the largest lobbying law firms in the United States in Manhattan. I'm troubled by that. We have a candidate who worked for Citigroup for almost a decade and played a role in shutting down a factory in Buffalo and moving the jobs overseas into another state. I'm troubled by these things. I like all of these people. I think we all know we have a crisis, and frankly, it's caused a lot of us to stand up and say, what can I do?
Yes.
And that's wonderful. We all have a lot to do, and everybody who knows something's wrong has got to do it. But the thing we can't get wrong right now is putting forward the right face and the right message, which makes very clear to people that the Democratic Party is back and better than ever, that we are speaking from a tradition that is way, way deeper than maybe the Clintons that you might not have liked. We're going back to FDR. We're going back to JFK.
Yes.
We're going back to Harry Truman. We're going back to people who advocated, frankly, for universal health care loudly in their time. Yeah. And we can win if we do that.
Yeah. I have a thing that annoys me, or I like to say frosts my windshield, is when people call things like Social Security and Medicare as entitlements, because in my opinion, these are earned benefits. Mm. And when I think that Republicans like to keep calling them entitlements, as if they're a giveaway, and I don't like that because they keep hammering on that as if the taxpayers are getting hit over the head with something that's being given away, when in truth, these are earned benefits by hardworking people who worked all their lives and paid into these things and deserve these things when their time is due. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we try to change the language of these things so that they can't hit them, with, it's a giveaway, and that, the taxpayers are getting, built. No, it's not. These people earned and worked for these things, and it's not okay to say we're taking it away.
You're very right, and there's a lot of mind games being played to confuse people about the issues. Another one is, one of the issues is trying to use this term entitlements to make people forget that they paid into the very system that they are benefiting from, and that we created government. Why do we have a government? You see, this is what people forget, and obviously I'm a history teacher, so permit me a moment on this.
Yes.
People forget that there's always been somebody in charge in human history. There's no anarchy. It doesn't exist. Man's a social animal. There's always a government. The question is, who's in charge? And we created a government so that the people would be in charge. So we'd have a democracy and we'd vote to set the rules. If we stop doing that, we start taking apart our government, that doesn't mean that everybody gets free. That means a corporation takes over.
Yeah.
That means a king or a queen takes over.
Yeah.
And that's what has begun to happen ever since we created this mantra in this country that government's the problem. No, bad government's the problem. Good government's the solution.
Right.
But corporate control of our lives is not the solution.
Right.
That is not what we created in America. There's nothing wrong with corporations and jobs, and we need to work for them. By the way, a big thing we need, and you can just know it, anybody knows it traveling the district, is work on infrastructure, invest in it tremendously, invest in our bridges and roads, invest in sustainable energy. When you do these things, you're going to create non-exportable jobs that are going to revitalize your communities and revitalize your way of life in the process. And we've done it before in America, and we need to do it again. But this is the mentality we got to get back into. What we can do when we come together to do it. I really believe that we can do that. We can discover that solidarity.
Right now, we're focusing on ridiculousness, and unfortunately, my personal opinion, we're letting things happen in this country where the wrong people are being praised. We have. What happened in Charlottesville was a horror, and instead of our current administration coming right out and saying this is not supposed to happen in our country, we have ambivalency and almost a praise for it, and it's very scary.
Well, I brought a picture I was going to show you. That's my grandfather. He's a survivor of Auschwitz. All four of my grandparents were, and they were survivors, and they came to the United States to escape Nazi evil. And to see people bearing torches thinking that they can express that same evil, that this country is some sort of haven for that, is such an insult to both the memory of my grandparents and to what they believed in they've all passed on now, and what they left me to believe that I was going to keep going. Now, I'm not disheartened by these things, because I really believe that the vast majority of Americans know what things are about. The vast majority of Americans know that we pledge allegiance to the flag, and the flag is the red, white, and blue. It's not the Confederate flag.
That's right.
We have a beautiful flag, and we all pledge allegiance to it. And I frankly think that's the flag we need. I think we got a great flag.
Yes, we do.
And it stands for a lot. And I stand foursquare behind that flag, and I represented that flag overseas. I'm running for representative of us in Congress here, but it's not my first stint as a representative. I went around much of the world saying I am representing the United States of America, and here's what we stand for. And I spoke about human rights, and I spoke about working people and equal opportunity in our country. And I believed it, and I still believe it. But I will admit that what I've changed on a little bit, because this is what happens when you get older, is I came to realize that it was a faith, too. It wasn't just a thing that you're saying exists. It's a thing you're saying you believe in, and you're going to make it exist. And now that's part of why I'm running, is the belief that I've evolved in my life. I went from just executing those policies or just working for the government to realizing, no, we have to be the government and make those policies a reality. Yeah,
absolutely.
So that's what I'm after.
Well, you know what, Jeffrey, this has been a fabulous. I wish I had 2 hours with you, because I feel like there's so much more we could discuss. And I wish you all the luck because I think you will be a terrific congressman.
Thanks so much.
And I'd love to have you back again when you win the primary.
Thanks so much. The last thing I want to make sure to say is go to my website, uniteny19.org. That stands for Unite New York 19 forums I'm throwing all around the district on the issues we care about to make a grassroots platform for change. We threw one in Woodstock. We're throwing one in Hudson in Columbia County. We're going to set one up in Delaware soon with a friend of mine here. And they're going to be issues-based forums for people to speak out on their experiences and base our real grassroots platform for us to get behind to show what we're for, not just what we're against.
Absolutely. That's great. Thanks again. And this has been That's What She Said with Melody DeGregorio and Jeffrey Beals, who is running for the 19th seat in the 19th district of the congressional candidate. Oh, boy.